The day started like any other. Morning coffee brewed while Scarlett shuffled through the kitchen in her fuzzy slippers, humming an off-tune melody. Our daughter, Lily, sat at the table, giggling at something on her tablet. It was a scene right out of a Hallmark movie, the kind that made me think life couldn't be better. But something wasn't right. It began as a whisper in my mind. Scarlett had been distant lately, not in the obvious way that movies depict, a sudden coldness or mysterious late nights. No, she was as affectionate as ever, maybe even more so. She'd kiss my cheek, laugh at my jokes, and insist we plan a date night soon. But that was the problem. It felt too polished, like an actor playing a role. That afternoon, as I sorted through some documents in the home office, I came across a receipt tucked inside one of Scarlett's notebooks. It was for a boutique hotel about 30 miles out of town. Dated 2 weeks ago. Room service charges, champagne, and, what chilled me, 2 guests listed under the reservation. It wasn't the kind of evidence you could ignore, yet my hands trembled as I stared at the paper. My first thought was to confront her. I could already imagine her wide eyes, the stammered denials, or maybe even tears. But no, this wasn't enough. I needed more. If this was what I feared, I needed the truth, the whole truth, not some half-hearted excuse she could spin. I slipped the receipt back where I found it, careful not to leave any sign I'd seen it. My heart raced, each beat a drum of betrayal pounding in my chest. I needed time to think, to plan. That night, Scarlett was as attentive as ever. She made my favorite lasagna, pouring me an extra glass of wine as we sat at the dining table. She even leaned over and kissed me, whispering, "You work too hard." I almost choked. How could she say that, looking me in the eye, if it was someone else? As I lay in bed that night, listening to her steady breathing, I knew what I had to do. Impulsive reactions wouldn't serve me here. I needed clarity, not chaos. And that's when the idea came to me. Hire someone who could find the answers I couldn't. A professional. Tomorrow, I'd call a private investigator. The next morning, after Scarlett and Lily left for the day, Scarlett to her office and Lily to school, I sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee. My phone was in my hand, the browser already open to a local investigator's website. The decision weighed heavily on me. Was this too extreme? Was I overreacting? But the image of that hotel receipt flashed in my mind again. I couldn't ignore it. If I confronted her without knowing the full story, I'd just give her the chance to manipulate the narrative. No, I needed evidence. I made the call. Carter Investigations. A voice answered, gruff but professional. Hi, I'm looking for help with something personal. My throat felt dry as I forced the words out. The man on the other end was calm, methodical. He didn't rush me, didn't pry. Within minutes, I'd explain enough for him to understand the situation without me drowning in shame. We'll start with basic surveillance, he said. I'll tail her, check her patterns, see if there's any unusual behavior. If there's something to find, we'll find it. Hearing someone else say it validate my fears made it all feel painfully real. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a storm brewing on the horizon. The first few days were unbearable. Scarlett's behavior didn't change. She was the same loving wife and doting mother. She even suggested we take Lily to a fall festival that weekend. For a moment, as I watched her laugh and twirl Lily around on the hayride, I thought I'd made a mistake. Maybe I was wrong. But then Carter called me late one evening, just as I was tucking Lily into bed. You're going to want to see this, he said, his voice measured but grim. The next morning, we met in a diner on the edge of town. Carter was everything I imagined a private investigator would be. Worn leather jacket, tired eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor. He slid a manila envelope across the table. You sure about this? He asked. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and pulled out the photos. The first few showed Scarlett at her office, nothing out of the ordinary. But then came the shots that made my stomach churn. Scarlett, stepping out of a sleek black car, laughing as a man in a tailored suit opened the door for her. Scarlett, sitting across from him at a cafe, her hand casually resting on his arm. And the worst, Scarlett leaning into him, lips brushing his cheek as his hand slid down to the small of her back. His name's Damian Cole, Carter said, breaking the silence. Works at her firm. They've been meeting during lunch breaks, a couple of late-night rendezvous too. Nothing explicit yet, but, well, the photos speak for themselves. I stared at the images, my vision blurring as tears threatened to spill over. This was it. Proof. But instead of feeling vindicated, all I felt was despair. She's careful, Carter continued. If you want more concrete evidence, I'll need more time. But I think it's clear what's going on. I nodded, unable to lift my gaze from the photos. Keep going, I said finally. I need to know everything. That night, I couldn't bring myself to look at Scarlett. Every touch felt like acid on my skin, every laugh a dagger in my heart. Yet she was so convincing, so normal. Was this what she'd been doing all along? Playing the perfect wife while sneaking off with someone else? I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling as she slept beside me. The truth was beginning to take shape, but the question loomed larger than ever. What would I do once I had all the answers? The following week was agony. Every time Scarlett looked at me with those soft, adoring eyes, I felt a chasm widen between us. She was a stranger now. Her affection, tainted by the images, burned into my mind. But I played my part. I smiled, laughed at her jokes, and kissed her goodbye before she left for work. The facade was unbearable, but I needed time to gather my strength and more evidence. Carter called me again on Thursday. His voice was colder this time, more clinical. I got video this time. You're going to want to see this in person. We met in the same diner, though this time I didn't touch my coffee. My hands shook as Carter set his laptop on the table and pressed play. The grainy footage showed Scarlett walking into the same boutique hotel I'd seen on that receipt. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, low-cut, curve-hugging, a far cry from her usual understated style. A moment later, Damien appeared, his arms slipping around her waist as they entered the lobby. Carter fast-forwarded through timestamps, and then my stomach dropped. The elevator doors opened on the top floor. Scarlett and Damien stepped out, their hands intertwined. The video cut off as they disappeared into a suite. That's all I've got, Carter said, closing the laptop. They were in there for 3 hours. No way to know what happened, but I didn't need him to finish. I knew. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. I spent the next few days walking around in a haze, consumed by the weight of it all. But things took a bizarre turn that Saturday. Scarlett, in an uncharacteristically upbeat mood, asked me to sit down after breakfast. There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about, she said, her voice warm but cautious. I've been thinking maybe we should try something different in our marriage. I set down my coffee, the hair on the back of my neck bristling. Different how? She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I've been spending time with some friends at work, and they've opened my eyes to new perspectives on relationships. What kind of perspectives? My voice was steady, but my pulse pounded in my ears. Scarlett hesitated, then leaned forward, her hands clasping mine. Open marriages. Sharing experiences with other people. It's not about love. It's about freedom and connection. It could bring us closer, Christopher. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, like she'd spent weeks practicing them in the mirror. This wasn't a conversation. It was a sales pitch. Scarlett, I said slowly. Are you saying you want to sleep with other people? Not just that, she said quickly, her grip tightening on my hands. It's about broadening our horizons, exploring things together. Together? I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. And who, exactly, have you been exploring this idea with? Her face froze for a split second before she forced a laugh. No one, of course. I've just been talking with some colleagues. I think it could be good for us. I stood up, pulling my hands free from hers. Good for us? I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. You mean like sneaking off to a hotel with your colleague Damien? Is that part of this enlightened perspective too? Her face went pale, the practice calm shattering. What are you talking about? Don't insult me, Scarlett. I know. I've seen the pictures. The videos. My voice cracked, the weight of my emotions finally breaking through. You've been lying to me. To Lily. While you play house and kiss me goodnight, you're out there doing this. She stammered, her composure unraveling. Christopher, wait, it's not what you think. Damien is just... Don't. I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you dare lie to me again. She sat there, her face crumbling under the weight of my accusations. For the first time in days, I felt like I was seeing the real Scarlett. Not the perfect wife, not the manipulative negotiator, just a woman caught in her own web of deceit. That night, I slept in the guest room, the first of many nights apart. But my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to let her rewrite this narrative or manipulate me into her twisted vision of a marriage. I needed to protect Lily, protect myself, and make sure that Scarlett faced the consequences of her betrayal. The morning after our confrontation, the house was cloaked in a tense silence. Scarlett moved through the motions like a ghost, her usual bright demeanor replaced by a strained calm. Every now and then, I caught her glancing at me, as if trying to gauge how much of the situation she could salvage. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. For Lily's sake, I kept up appearances. I drove her to her ballet recital that evening, cheering her on from the audience as if nothing in my world had changed. Scarlett didn't come. She claimed to have work to catch up on. I didn't press her on it. I knew where she was, or at least who she was likely with. That night, when Lily was asleep, Scarlett knocked on the door to the guest room. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, lost in thought. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice edged with desperation. I hesitated before nodding. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and sat in the chair across from me. For the first time in years, she looked small, fragile, like someone who'd built a tower too tall and was waiting for it to collapse. "I never meant to hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "I got caught up in something I didn't understand. Damien, it wasn't supposed to mean anything." "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult my intelligence, Scarlett. You don't book hotel suites and kiss someone like that if it doesn't mean anything." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But it doesn't change how much I love you." "Love?" The word escaped my lips in a bitter laugh. "You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to my face, trying to sell me on this open marriage nonsense? That's not love, Scarlett. That's manipulation." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I didn't stop. "Do you even hear yourself? You want me to believe this is about broadening horizons? No. This is about you being too much of a coward to admit you've already burned everything we built." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. This wasn't some tragic misunderstanding. This was calculated, planned. "I need to know," I said, my voice quieter but no less firm. "How long has this been going on? The lies, the hotels, Damien." She hesitated, then looked away, her silence speaking volumes. "How long, Scarlett?" I pressed. "A few months," she whispered finally. "It started after that work retreat in the spring. He made me feel special, wanted, like I was more than just a wife and mother. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Spring. That was when Lily had won her first big soccer tournament, and Scarlett had come home from the retreat glowing, talking about how inspired she felt after networking with her colleagues. I'd been so proud of her, never suspecting the betrayal lurking behind her smiles. I shook my head, the rage bubbling just below the surface. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to me, but to Lily? To this family?" "I know," she choked out, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know I've messed everything up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll cut things off with Damien. I already have. Please, Christopher. I can't lose you." Her pleas felt like acid on my skin. How could someone so calculating, so selfish, now beg for my forgiveness as if it was owed to her? "I'm not making any decisions tonight," I said, standing up and walking to the door. "But don't think for a second that this is something we can just sweep under the rug. I need time, and I need space." She nodded, her face crumpling as I left her alone in the guest room. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a storm of anger, grief, and doubt. I replayed every moment of the past few months, searching for the cracks I'd missed, the signs I'd ignored. How had I been so blind? Was I really so naive? Or had she simply perfected the art of deception? By morning, I had made up my mind. If Scarlett thought she could manipulate her way back into my good graces, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her rewrite this story. It was time to consult an attorney. The following week felt like walking a tightrope. Scarlett had dialed her charm up to full volume, cooking my favorite meals, making small talk, and even suggesting we take a family trip. I played along when Lily was around, but behind the scenes, I was putting my own plans into motion. The attorney I met with, Claire Monroe, came highly recommended. Her office was small but professional, the walls lined with bookshelves that gave her a no-nonsense air. She greeted me with a firm handshake and an expression that suggested she'd seen it all before. "Let's start with the basics," she said, flipping open a notepad. "You mentioned your wife's infidelity in the intake form. Tell me what you've got." I laid out everything. The hotel receipt, Carter's photos and videos, even the ridiculous conversation about open marriages. Claire didn't blink. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notebook. "You've got a strong case," she said, "but we need to be smart about this. North Carolina is an at-fault divorce state, which works in your favor. Adultery can influence property division, spousal support, and even custody arrangements. The key is proving it beyond a shadow of a doubt." "I have proof," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "The photos, the video." "It's a good start," she interrupted, "but judges prefer hard evidence that leaves no room for interpretation. We'll need Carter's testimony, any communications you can gather between your wife and this Damien, and ideally, some confirmation of the affair's duration." The thought of dredging up even more details made my stomach churn, but I nodded. I wasn't doing this for vengeance. I was doing it to protect myself and Lily. Claire leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Christopher, I know this is painful, but you need to stay calm and calculated. Any impulsive actions or outbursts could work against you in court. Can you do that?" I swallowed hard, then nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I started spending more time away from home, throwing myself into work and leaning on my closest friend, Matt, for support. He was one of the few people I trusted with the truth, and his quiet encouragement kept me grounded. Meanwhile, Carter continued his surveillance. Every few days, he'd send me updates, each one more damning than the last. Scarlett and Damien had apparently cooled things down after our confrontation, but there were still traces, late-night texts, discreet meetings at work. It was enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't a mistake or a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a deliberate betrayal. Scarlett, for her part, seemed to sense the distance growing between us. One evening, as I sat in the living room, flipping through a book I wasn't really reading, she sat down beside me. "Christopher," she began hesitantly, "I know I've hurt you, but I want to fix this. For Lily, for us. Can't we just start over?" I set the book down and looked at her, my face carefully neutral. "Start over how, Scarlett? Pretend this never happened? Rewrite the past?" "No," she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. I want us to find a way back to what we had." "What we had," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "What we had is gone, Scarlett. You destroyed it the moment you decided I wasn't enough." Her tears spilled over, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said sharply. "You don't get to cry and play the victim here. I've spent weeks trying to understand how you could do this, and the truth is I don't think I ever will." She stared at me, her face crumbling. "So that's it? You're giving up on us?" "I'm not giving up," I said, my voice hard. "I'm standing up for myself. For Lily. And if that means walking away from this, whatever this has become, then so be it." She didn't reply, just sat there, her shoulders shaking as she cried. But I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. Not anymore. That night, I started drafting the separation agreement. I wasn't ready to file for divorce just yet. Not until I had every piece of evidence in place. But this was the first step. The first step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. A week later, the house was quieter than ever. Scarlett had stopped trying to win me over, retreating into her own space, while I focused on Lily. I threw myself into being present for her, helping with homework, taking her to soccer practice, and making sure she felt safe and loved. If nothing else, I wanted to shield her from the storm brewing between her parents. But Scarlett wasn't finished. Not yet. It happened on a Friday evening. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when she walked in, holding a glass of wine. Her expression was calm, too calm. I braced myself. "Christopher," she said, leaning against the counter, "I've been thinking. This tension between us isn't good for anyone, especially Lily. We need to find a way to move forward." I didn't answer, just kept scrubbing the same plate until she continued. "I spoke to Damien," she said, her tone almost casual, like she was talking about the weather. "We've decided to keep things professional moving forward. No more complications. I'm committed to making this work." I froze, the plate slipping from my hands into the soapy water. "You spoke to him," I repeated, my voice low. "That's your solution?" "Yes," she said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "We agreed it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But it's over now." I turned to face her, my jaw tight. "Do you honestly think that changes anything? You don't get to sweep this under the rug and pretend it's all fine." Her calm facade faltered for a moment, but then she straightened, her gaze hardening. "I'm trying, Christopher. I'm trying to fix this, to fix us. But you're so focused on punishing me that you can't see that I'm doing everything I can." "Fix it?" I laughed bitterly. "You think you can fix this with empty promises and lies? You didn't just betray me, Scarlett. You betrayed Lily, our family. And now you want me to just what? Forgive and forget." "I made a mistake," she snapped, her voice rising. "Yes, I hurt you, but don't act like you're some perfect saint. You've been emotionally distant for years, Christopher. Always working, always too tired to connect. Damien gave me something I was missing, something you've neglected." Her words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "So this is my fault now?" "I didn't say that," she said quickly, though her expression betrayed her guilt. "But maybe if you'd been more present, this wouldn't have happened." "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. "You can't even own up to what you've done without trying to shift the blame." We stared at each other in silence, the weight of her words hanging between us. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, but instead, she turned on her heel and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the echo of her accusations. That night, Carter called me with another update. "I've got something you need to see," he said. "It's significant." We met the next morning, and he handed me a new stack of photos, his face unreadable. As I flipped through them, my heart sank. Scarlett hadn't cut things off with Damien, not even close. The photos showed them at a restaurant, sitting close, holding hands. Another captured them in his car, their faces close enough to kiss. "She's still seeing him," I muttered, anger rising in my chest. "Looks that way," Carter said quietly. "I can keep digging, but at this point I think you've got enough." I nodded, my mind racing. Enough for what? A confrontation? A divorce? My emotions swung wildly between rage and despair. But one thing was clear. Scarlett had crossed a line she could never come back from. Back at home, I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at the front door. Inside was the woman I had loved for over a decade, the mother of my child, the partner I'd once trusted with my whole heart. But now, she was a stranger who had lied, betrayed, and manipulated me at every turn. Finally, I went inside. Scarlett was in the living room, reading a book. She looked up as I entered, her face lighting up with a smile that made me sick. "Hey," she said, her voice light. "How was your day?" I stood there, clutching the envelope of photos in my hand. "Do you think I'm stupid?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" I threw the envelope onto the coffee table, the photos spilling out. "You said it was over." You looked me in the eye and lied. Again. Scarlett's face drained of color as she saw the images, her hands trembling. "Christopher, I can explain." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear another word. You've destroyed everything, Scarlett. I'm done." Her lips parted as if to protest, but then she closed her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, she looked truly broken, like she finally understood the gravity of what she'd done. But it was too late. That night, I slept in the guest room again, but this time, I felt a strange sense of peace. The illusion was shattered, but with it came clarity. I didn't need Scarlett's lies, her manipulations, or her empty promises. I needed to move forward for myself and for Lily. It was time to start over. The morning after my final confrontation with Scarlett, I felt strangely light. The weight of pretending, of hoping against hope, had finally lifted. My path forward was clear. I wasn't going to let Scarlett's betrayal define me, nor would I let it destroy Lily's sense of stability. The first thing I did was call Claire, my attorney. "It's time," I said, the words steady and deliberate. Claire didn't waste time. She explained that the separation agreement would outline custody arrangements, property division, and a temporary living situation until the divorce was finalized. She reminded me again that North Carolina's at-fault divorce laws would work in my favor, especially with the mountain of evidence I now had. "This will protect your interests," she said firmly, "and ensure Scarlett can't manipulate the narrative." I didn't feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in this, only the grim determination to rebuild my life on my terms. When I handed Scarlett the separation agreement that evening, her reaction was immediate and explosive. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice rising as she skimmed the document. "You want me to leave the house? You want full custody of Lily? Christopher, this is ridiculous." "What's ridiculous?" I said, my tone ice cold, "is that you're trying to play the victim here. I've been more than fair. You can stay in the house for now, but I want Lily with me. She deserves stability, and frankly, you've proven you can't provide it." Her face twisted with anger. "You think you're better than me? You think you're some perfect parent? You're just using Lily to punish me." "I'm protecting her," I shot back. "From your lies. From your selfishness. I'm doing what you should have done." Her hands shook as she slammed the papers onto the table. "I won't sign this," she spat. "You're not taking my daughter away from me." "Then we'll go to court," I said, meeting her glare with unwavering resolve. "And believe me, Scarlett, I'll win." The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and logistical planning. Scarlett alternated between pleading with me to reconsider and throwing venomous accusations my way. But I refused to be drawn into her games. My focus was on Lily and creating a sense of normalcy for her amid the chaos. I started looking for a new place to live. Staying under the same roof as Scarlett was unbearable, and I wanted Lily to have a home where she could feel safe and loved. With Claire's guidance, I also began preparing for the legal battles ahead, gathering financial records, documenting timelines, and ensuring Carter's evidence was airtight. One evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "why is Mommy so sad lately? Did I do something wrong?" Her words hit me like a freight train. I sat down beside her, pulling her into a hug. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy and Daddy are just working through some grown-up stuff. But I promise you, none of this is your fault. We both love you very much." She nodded against my chest, but her little body trembled with unspoken worry. In that moment, I knew I couldn't let my anger towards Scarlett overshadow what mattered most, protecting Lily from the fallout of her mother's actions. A week later, I found an apartment a few miles away, small but cozy and perfect for starting fresh. I signed the lease and began the slow process of moving my things out of the house. Scarlett watched in silence as I packed, her expression unreadable. She hadn't signed the separation agreement yet, but the wheels were already in motion. Claire assured me that the court would enforce temporary orders if Scarlett continued to resist. The night before I left, Scarlett approached me in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Christopher," she said quietly, "is this really the end? After everything we've been through?" I set down the box I was holding, meeting her gaze. "You ended this, Scarlett. The moment you chose to betray me, to betray us. I've given you every chance to come clean, to take responsibility, and you've done nothing but lie. I can't stay in this marriage. Not for you, and not for me." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, stripped of all her masks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I know, I said softly. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. The next day, I moved into my new apartment, bringing Lily with me for her first weekend in our new home. As I watched her explore the space, her giggles filling the air, I felt a flicker of hope. This was the beginning of something new, not what I'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, it could still be something good. The first weekend in the new apartment was bittersweet. Lily seemed to love the cozy space, especially the little reading nook I'd set up for her by the window. She spent hours curled up with her favorite books, her laughter echoing through the small rooms. But every so often, I'd catch her looking at me with a flicker of uncertainty, as if she was waiting for me to confirm that everything would be okay. I didn't let her see my doubts. I poured every ounce of energy into making her feel secure, even as Scarlett continued her campaign of resistance. She still hadn't signed the separation agreement, and the tension between us only deepened when we swapped Lily at the house. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Scarlett hissed one evening, her voice low so Lily couldn't hear. "Dragging lawyers into this, fighting over custody. What kind of father puts his daughter through this?" I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice calm. The kind of father who refuses to let her grow up in a house built on lies. Scarlett's expression hardened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she slammed the door behind her as I walked away with Lily's hand in mine. By the time our first court hearing arrived, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. Claire had been thorough, compiling every piece of evidence into a case that left little room for doubt. Between Carter's testimony, the photos, and the timeline we'd pieced together, the narrative was clear. Scarlett had violated our marriage vows, and her decisions had destabilized our family. Scarlett's attorney, a slick man in a sharp suit, tried to paint a different picture. He argued that Scarlett's affair had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment that shouldn't define her as a mother. He claimed I was being vindictive, using Lily as leverage to punish Scarlett for her actions. It was hard to sit there listening to someone twist the truth. But Claire was relentless. She presented the evidence with precision, methodically dismantling their arguments until there was nothing left but Scarlett's lies. When Scarlett took the stand, she looked fragile, her voice breaking as she spoke about her love for Lily and her regret for what had happened. "Do you regret the affair?" Claire asked her, her tone sharp but professional. "Yes," Scarlett said, tears streaming down her face. "I regret everything, but it was never about not loving Christopher. I've always loved him." "And yet," Claire pressed, "you continued to see Damian Cole even after your husband confronted you about the affair. Is that correct?" Scarlett hesitated, her face crumbling under the weight of the question. Finally, she nodded. "That will be all," Claire said, turning back to the judge. When the judge issued temporary custody orders, the decision was clear. I would have primary custody of Lily, with Scarlett granted visitation rights. The judge also ordered her to move out of the house, allowing me to stay until we finalized the divorce and property division. Scarlett's face was a mask of shock and disbelief as the ruling was read. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, I knew she loved Lily. But this wasn't about punishment. It was about giving our daughter the stability she deserved. Over the next few weeks, Scarlett tried to mend fences, though her efforts felt hollow. She called often, leaving voicemails that alternated between tearful apologies and sharp accusations. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on building a new rhythm for Lily and me. One evening, as I was helping Lily with her homework, my phone buzzed with a message from Scarlett. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I know I've hurt you," the message read, "but we can still fix this. I want to fix this for Lily, for us. Please, Christopher, don't throw everything away." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing my reply. "You threw it away the moment you chose someone else. I'm moving forward, Scarlett. I suggest you do the same." As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of peace creeping into my life. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But every time Lily smiled, every time she curled up in my lap and told me she loved me, I felt the strength to keep going. Scarlett, meanwhile, seemed to spiral. Mutual friends mentioned she'd been skipping work, isolating herself. Damien had apparently dropped her the moment things became complicated, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't muster the energy. My focus was on Lily and on healing. One evening, as Lily and I were watching a movie together, she turned to me with a shy smile. "Daddy," she said, "I like our new home. It feels happy." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I managed to smile back. "Me too, sweetheart," I said, pulling her close. "Me too." The days following the custody ruling were a whirlwind of adjustment, but in the quiet moments, I started to notice something strange: the absence of chaos. For the first time in months, there were no late-night confrontations, no tearful pleas from Scarlett, no strained silences that left the air heavy. The apartment wasn't much, but it became a haven for Lily and me, a space where we could just breathe. Scarlett, on the other hand, wasn't handling the transition well. I could see it in her eyes every time she picked Lily up for her visitation weekends, red-rimmed, hollow, a shadow of the woman I once knew. Part of me wanted to pity her, but another part, the part that had carried the weight of her betrayal, wouldn't let me. A month after the ruling, Scarlett asked to meet me for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I figured it was better to keep communication civil, if only for Lily's sake. We met at a small cafe downtown. Scarlett looked tired, her usually immaculate appearance frayed at the edges. She fidgeted with her cup, avoiding my eyes. "I'm not here to fight," she said softly. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "For what, exactly?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away this time. "For everything. For lying to you. For betraying you. For ruining us." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." I studied her for a moment, searching for the manipulation I'd come to expect. But there was none. Just raw, painful honesty. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But sorry doesn't change what happened." She nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I know. I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I've been seeing a therapist. I'm trying to figure out where I went wrong, why I did what I did." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw her not as my betrayer, but as someone deeply flawed, grappling with her own demons. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. "I hope it helps," I said, my voice steady. "For your sake and for Lily's." Scarlett nodded again, her lips trembling as she fought to hold back more tears. "Thank you." After that meeting, something shifted. Scarlett stopped trying to win me back, and our interactions became less fraught. We communicated only about Lily, drop-offs, school events, doctor's appointments. It was civil, if not exactly friendly. And honestly, that was enough. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Lily came into the kitchen, clutching a drawing in her small hands. "Daddy," she said, holding it out to me, "I made this for you." The drawing was simple, just the two of us holding hands under a big yellow sun, with the words "Me and Daddy" scrawled across the top in her careful handwriting. But it hit me harder than anything else had. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. "This is beautiful, Lily. Thank you." "I love you, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered, my throat tight. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't broken anymore. Scarlett's betrayal had left scars, yes, but they no longer defined me. I had Lily, I had a new beginning, and I had the strength to move forward. As the months passed, life slowly began to take shape again. I threw myself into work, reconnecting with old friends, and even picking up hobbies I'd long since abandoned. Lily thrived in the stability of our new routine, her laughter a constant reminder of why I'd fought so hard. Scarlett stayed in the background, honoring the terms of our custody agreement without complaint. She even started showing up to Lily's soccer games, sitting quietly on the sidelines without trying to insert herself into our new life. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace nonetheless. One day, as I was flipping through Lily's school calendar, a realization struck me. It had been a year since the day I'd found that receipt. A year since my world had crumbled, since I'd thought I would never recover. And yet here I was, stronger than I'd ever been. That evening, as Lily and I shared a bowl of popcorn and laughed at a silly cartoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Not for what had happened, but for what I'd learned. Betrayal had tested me in ways I never imagined. But it had also taught me the value of resilience, of self-worth, and of the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. A year after everything fell apart, life finally felt like it was coming together. The divorce was finalized, and the terms were fair. Scarlett and I shared joint custody, but Lily lived primarily with me. Scarlett moved into an apartment closer to her work, and though our conversations were brief and businesslike, there was no more tension, just a quiet acceptance of the roles we now played in each other's lives. One Friday evening, Lily came running into the living room, clutching a flyer in her hands. "Daddy, look," she exclaimed, waving it at me. "The school's having a father-daughter dance. Can we go? Please." I took the flyer, smiling at her enthusiasm. The dance was a week away, and she'd circled the date in bright pink marker. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair. "We'll make it the best night ever." Her face lit up, and she threw her arms around me. "I'm going to wear my sparkly dress, the one Grandma gave me, and you can wear a suit." "I'll wear my best suit," I promised, laughing at her excitement. The night of the dance, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. Lily appeared behind me, her sparkly dress shimmering in the light. She looked like a little princess, her eyes bright with anticipation. "You look beautiful," I said, kneeling down to straighten the bow in her hair. "And you look handsome, Daddy," she replied, beaming. We drove to the school, where the gym had been transformed with twinkling lights and balloons. The room buzzed with laughter and music as fathers and daughters filled the dance floor. Lily grabbed my hand, dragging me to the middle of the room. "Come on, Daddy, dance with me." I laughed, letting her spin me around as the music played. For the next few hours, nothing else mattered. It was just Lily and me, her giggles blending with the upbeat songs. I hadn't felt that kind of joy in years, and it was a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to protect our bond. Toward the end of the evening, as we sat at a small table sipping punch, Lily looked up at me with a serious expression. "Daddy, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean, are you happy now?" she asked, her little brow furrowed. "You seem happier than you used to be. Before, when Mommy lived with us." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "I am happy," I said honestly, "because I have you. And as long as I have you, I'll always be happy." She smiled, her face softening. "I'm happy too, Daddy." The drive home was quiet, Lily dozing off in the back seat, her sparkly dress crumpled from a night of dancing. As I carried her inside and tucked her into bed, I realized how much we'd both grown in the past year. The pain of Scarlett's betrayal was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It had shaped me, sure, but it hadn't defined me. A few weeks later, I ran into Scarlett at one of Lily's soccer games. She waved from the sidelines, her expression hesitant. After the game, as Lily chatted with her friends, Scarlett approached me. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "You look like you were having fun out there." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Lily's been practicing hard. She's doing great." Scarlett hesitated, then looked down at her hands. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done for her, for being such a good dad." I studied her for a moment, noting the sincerity in her voice. "Lily's my priority. Always has been." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I can see that. She's lucky to have you." There was no bitterness in her tone, no hidden agenda. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the life we'd built separately. And for the first time, I felt no anger toward her, only a distant kind of gratitude for the lessons her betrayal had taught me. As I drove home with Lily, her laughter filling the car, I realized something profound. Life wasn't about clinging to what was lost. It was about finding strength in the people who mattered, in the love that remained. Scarlett's choices had changed my life, but they hadn't destroyed it. If anything, they'd given me the clarity to rebuild something better. And in that moment, with Lily by my side, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. What do you guys think of my story? Share in the comments what you think about the choice I made, and would you do in my situation?